everyone. I will present my friend Rehan Chaudhri. Rehan is an executive with Capital Guidance, a global firm in 40 countries specializing in real estate, industrial materials, luxury goods, and finance, with headquarters in Geneva and Switzerland. Rehan is also CEO of Peak 15 Advisors and is a global investor in the technology, real estate, and emerging energy sectors. He was formerly a portfolio manager and principal at Altrinsic Global Advisors, which has emerged $14 billion of capital. Prior to Altrinsic, he was a portfolio manager for Lazard Asset Management on its $30 billion international fund. His previous investment experience includes Brandywine Asset Management, Legg Mason Group Company, global and international funds as a managing director, as well as telecommunications, equity, research analyst for Morgan Stanley. He began his career as a technology and strategic management consultant and worked for Booz, Allen & Hamilton. There are so many occupations that Rehan has contributed to that it's hard to combine all of them in this speech, but he's also a regular speaker at the United Nations, and I'm really, really happy that he accepted this webinar for us with World Information Transfer. Thank you, Rehan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Miriam, for that very kind introduction. I would like to also thank Dr. Christine Derbach and the United Nations World Information Transfer Institute for allowing me to speak here, and the audience for taking out the time to participate. I'll try to keep my comments relatively short, and so we can open it up for Q&A. The gist of our presentation will be to go over emerging socio-demographic trends, technological trends, some of the issues that we face, particularly during these troubled times that has accelerated some demographic and socio-demographic issues, but also look perhaps beyond that and optimistically as to how technology and an emerging consensus that the world actually has to benefit the entire world and not just an elite few.
Now I can hear
actually use technology to rectify
something was
some
wrong
of these
with my
issues.
speaker. Okay. Okay.
Dr. Derbach, Miriam, would you like me to continue?
Is he talking already, or is he asking a question? Fred.
I think you can continue, Rehan.
Okay, Fred, please, thank you. Please move the presentation up to the screen, please. For view of the audience. Thank you so much. Okay, so basically what we'll do is maybe review the demographic trends for the next century. An important event has taken place in human history. This is the first time in human history where there are now more 65-year-olds globally than there are young children below the age of 5. So we have passed the peak youth era for the first time in human history. If we do look at the charts, I apologize for the small font on top. The first one is the current environment from 2010. The second chart is 2050. The third is by 2100. And you can see within 80 years, the young population will largely be resident in Africa, parts of the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of Latin America. The remainder of the world's population will have aged to the point that significant amounts of people will be above the age of 65. This has long-term impacts for healthcare, for total factor productivity, and perhaps where the world needs to focus on quite urgently in terms of ensuring that our young populations, as they grow and become a larger part of the world population in the emerging markets, are adequately educated and have significant skill sets for the coming world where artificial intelligence and technology will begin to dominate. Slide 2, please.
No, yeah, ja muted. Muted.
Fred, please slide 2. Next page, please. One of the interesting phenomena right now is we've perhaps encountered one of the highest levels of global wealth concentration. The super rich have gotten even richer during the past crisis period because the world's central banks have embarked on a significant amount of monetary policy. The monetary policy has pushed up the financial assets, stocks, bonds, and to a certain degree, real estate, which is lagged, but has still gone up. So the rich have gotten richer, and the poor have the middle class is actually beginning to get squeezed out, particularly with the rise of COVID and the layoffs and the financial distress around the world. This has exacerbated the situation as the wealthy have now become hyper wealthy. We have now passed the point of the 1920s prior to World War II, where the discrepancy between the rich and poor has gotten to an extraordinary extreme. This is unsustainable and will only result in more volatility around the world, and world leaders around the world are now taking an active stance to ensure that the middle class and the emerging classes have adequate safety net during this down period, but also are able to rebound once we get through this COVID period. If you look at the lower right-hand corner, you can see the wealth concentration between 2000 to 2020 has increased significantly just over a 2-decade period, which is almost unprecedented in human history in terms of creation of wealth, but the lack of distribution to the entire world population. And this is not only a phenomenon in the developed world, but is also prevalent within the emerging markets and is something that must be addressed. Next page, please, Fred. If we also look at the cost of housing, because of this secularly low interest rate environment and the decline in interest rates around the world, it has pushed up housing to the point that it is actually becoming unaffordable for young people in major urban areas throughout the world. Now, in certain parts of the world, in Asia in particular, there's significant policy push to ensure that young people not only have affordable housing, but a housing that is actually suitable for their needs. At Capital Guidance, we've developed unique destination real estate that's mixed use with residential, entertainment, restaurants, hotels, and office space, all within a certain location, which is how young people like to live. So rather than just building low-cost housing and putting young people into that area, we believe that we have to do housing that's affordable, but also that suits the evolving lifetime needs of young people, where they do like to work, live within a close proximity and avoid the long commutes that are required within an urban area. So we do believe there are solutions, and these emerging solutions are being supported very strongly by policy within several very large Asian nations. And we hope to perhaps use a few landmark examples to spread this type of development, so that it makes affordability and livability a global phenomenon. But currently, right now, this is becoming an issue as important as the wealth concentration. Next page, please. If we do look at the shift towards urban in large areas, although there has been a slight shift towards near urban, suburban because of COVID, the trend towards urbanization has been strong. The world was only 25% urbanized just 40 years ago, and now half the world's population lives in cities, and by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. So as a large real estate developer with Capital Guidance, we're highly cognizant that to build such densely populated areas, we need to behave much more smartly and develop smart cities that make the life and security and quality of life within urban areas much more amenable to the burgeoning population of cities at the expense of rural areas. Next page, please. Part of this has also been resulting in a high degree of congestion. You can also see that of the top 20 most congested cities, 25 cities, 20 of them are in the emerging markets. So significant amounts of infrastructure, mass transit, or the developing of micro smart cities is actually a vital part of urban development and real estate development. And this is something that Capital Guidance is looking at in significant amounts of detail. This actually affects productivity of a nation. If you look at the large purple circles within the map, if you try to set up a meeting in any of the top 5 most congested cities in the world, and you have to meet people face to face, you can only barely set up 3 meetings a day versus 6 to 7 meetings prior to the fact that we had so much congestion just 20 years ago. So congestion is not only an issue of pollution and of a human element, but also has a negative effect on GDP and the economic multiplier effect. Also, when a city is so congested, the amount of lead poisoning from ICEs or internal combustion engine transportation has a significant negative effect on child development. In certain cities, the IQ of a child because of lead poisoning in some of the urban areas actually drops by almost 7 to 8% before adulthood, before what can be described as in less congested areas. So mass transit, the development of smart cities, the development of focused policy for affordability is a vital part for all world economies for the next decade. Next page, please. One of the key issues will be education. If we look at our young population and we say in the next 80 years, the young population will be in the emerging markets, particularly Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of Latin America. The emerging markets education is vital towards the multiplier effect for GDP. Additionally, we'll go later on into the presentation with regards to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a benefit to humanity in terms of productivity, but it's also a hindrance in terms of job creation, which we'll examine a bit later. If you look at the lower left-hand chart, I apologize again for the small font. You can see that the dark blue and the tan chart are China and India. Although they were a small part of tertiary education, by 2030, half of all tertiary education holders will come from 2 countries alone, China and India. And part of that is due to their large populations, but also both countries have made significant investments in education and educational infrastructure. And the examples of both 2 nations should be applied to all the other nations in the emerging markets in particular, and particularly to the fast-growing nations in Africa and the Middle East, which have very young populations. But if we do look at the chart on the lower right-hand corner, if you download the presentation, you can see that actually education within the emerging markets is not as prevalent as we would like it, particularly if we want to have a workforce that's employed, young people that are employed and productive, which will be more and more scarce because we have passed the peak aging population. So education is vital as a matter of GDP development. And not only is education vital, but if we look at World Bank statistics, one of the few statistically significant indicators of pro forma GDP growth rate is female education. So educating our young girls is a vital part of ensuring the next population continues to be educated and total factor of productivity increases at a continued pace within the rapidly growing economies. So education, I think, will benefit from technology. With remote education, with technological advances, we believe that we can take some of the best practices from around the world and bring them to some of the poorest, fastest growing economies to ensure that our young population globally can fully work within an environment of the future where technology and AI may be far more prevalent than it is currently at the moment. Next page, please. One of the negative effects of the human industrial revolution for the past 200 years and the dependent on fossil fuels is that we are now currently at a 200,000-year high for temperatures on the planet. This has a strong negative effect, particularly around the equatorial region, around emerging markets. The volatility in weather will have a huge issue on crop and agricultural production. So ensuring proper food and food security and food supply is a vital part of world policy. Now, again, here, technology is playing a vital role with drones, with smartphones, with the ability to predict certain weather events, and with new seeds and crop technology. We believe that although this is a negative effect, there are ways that technology can benefit us significantly. But this is an area which perhaps we have reached a point of no return in terms of global warming, but there are new technological advances that we think are highly optimistic that will not reach a worst case scenario. But one of the issues too is with the global warming and the rise of oceans, almost 30% of the world population lives in coastal areas that are low-lying and are highly vulnerable and susceptible towards adverse weather patterns. Next page, please. Well, here from now, although we painted a slightly negative scenario about many trends affecting humanity, going forward in the presentation, we'll look at the positive effects. One area that's been incredibly positive is the driving down of the cost of renewable fuels, whether it's hydro, wind, solar panels. It's now, I'll give you an example, in India, the cost of solar energy is now 4 cents per kilowatt hour. In India, there's like many emerging markets, there's a large dependence on diesel fuel as gensets to offset when the grid fails. So from this perspective, China actually has been at the forefront of driving down the costs. 85% of all solar components are produced in one country, which is China. So by exporting these low-cost renewable energy products to the emerging markets, they can help accelerate the green revolution and to displace highly polluting, highly dangerous fossil fuel dependency that the world has been on for the past century. So in that sense, the developments within Asia and the export into the emerging markets is actually quite positive. Next page, please. So energy consumption, as you can see in the emerging markets, is rising very rapidly. There should be policies that support renewable energy, whether it's wind, hydro, biomass, or solar. And we're beginning to see this where almost half now of even in the developed world, almost 65–70% of all new energy sources within the United States are wind and solar. The rest is natural gas, which, although a fossil fuel, is the least pollutant thereof. So the elimination of coal towards renewable energies combined with baseload natural gas is the way of the future. Next page, please. Smart city technologies. There's a multitude of new technologies that will make our lives more efficient. Some of the developments we're doing and targeting within Asia will ensure that actually there is actually no car ownership. There'll be self-driving cars, fully electric. There'll be sensors throughout the city that can turn on and off energy supply in certain areas when people are no longer working there or in offices, and handle it much more intelligently. There are recycling bins where we no longer have garbage trucks coming, where it'll be actually done through tubes that are shifted down. So recycling will become a new part of the new city of the future. I apologize, I don't have time to go over the 16 different technologies here, but capital guidance is focusing on developing these smart cities throughout the world, and using this as an example to look at cities of the future that are actually in fact sustainable. One thing I do want to point out is many people do say that cities are polluting, but cities compared to the suburbs are a highly efficient use of energy, given that suburban household as an independent home is far more energy intensive than, let's say, an apartment building or the structure within an urban area. So urbanization actually, in fact, is environmentally friendly if it's developed in a sustainable manner. Next page, please. Smart cities generate an incredible amount of data. Now, the current human data that we've analyzed with our current technology has only analyzed 2% of all the data that's being produced. Data development doubles every 2 years in line with Moore's law. So we are way beyond the ability of humans to analyze data, and we must use. We must use.
No.
So we must use artificial intelligence. So the development of AI has been spearheaded by the United States and China, who are probably amongst the most advanced there, followed by Japan, Korea, and Europe. So these AI technologies will help us analyze this mass amount of data to make life more efficient and more productive, and to help us with GDP. Next page, please. The large amount of data requires significant amounts of AI algorithms. Now, it is quite interesting. There is quite about a latent amount of computing power at the edge of the web. So although servers are prevalent now throughout the world, these latent powers, let's say even my own PC right here, can act as a remote server for an AI-based technology. So we're generating large amounts of data, but the infrastructure is already set up. And given the way modern scientists are working on it, we believe that the infrastructure is set up that we can more rapidly evaluate this huge amount of data that's being developed, and hopefully that data will be used for productive and to the benefit of people and society. Next page, please. The AI benefits will be highest within the emerging markets, as they have an acceleration of GDP growth rates, perhaps the highest within China, in ASEAN, South Asia, and within Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. Although the developed world will benefit significantly, the GDP multiplier effect of AI will have the most benefit on the emerging markets. Next page, please. The other area is the shared business model, which has come out over the past 2 decades. This is quite fascinating, and we'll go over cars perhaps on the next page. But if you look at the average automobile, it's only used 2% of the time. It's actually parked 90% of the time. So once we get autonomous EV vehicles, we don't have to produce and waste so much of the resource in the world on producing automobiles. And any manufacturing process involves a high degree of pollution, whether it's automobile production or chemical production. So for us to be part of the green revolution, part of that is enhancing our existing resources. So the shared business model, again, within the emerging markets is exploding, and perhaps there's a history of sharing within the emerging markets because of the lack of income versus goods. Versus the developed markets that have perhaps more income than is available. So the shared business model, we think, is one of those future benefits that will continue to grow and have significant benefits to urbanization, utilization, and to increase people's standard of living, as you don't need to hoard, your own home or your own asset or your own office space. The shared business model will continue to grow, expand, and benefit humanity in terms of using less resources per person and per family. Next page, please. The next revolution, which is not talked about as much, is IoT. So Internet of Things, which is device-to-device communication. There are already four times as much devices connected now than smartphones around the world. This will explode exponentially. By 2030, there should be over 100 times more devices connected. This again necessitates a massive amount of data generation, and therefore it actually begins to increase the reliance on artificial intelligence and the development of parallel algorithms. I apologize. I think there may be a message on the screen that's covering the presentation. Next page, please. This is a great way where technology developed at the forefront in the United States and China, Japan, and Korea, and now spreading within Europe as well, is the rise of electric vehicles. By the middle of this decade, the average electric vehicle will have the same full ownership cost as a internal combustion engine vehicle. One interesting benefit about electric vehicles is that they have a far few components. So maintenance of electric vehicles is far lower than an ICE or internal combustion engine. And also, if you look at electricity prices versus fuel, is about 80% lower. So the fuel consumption for electric vehicle is significantly lower. Now, the only issue is if your fuel is coal sourced, you end up actually burning a lot of coal for an EV. So the key is to replace base load with natural gas, wind, solar, hydro, and biomass. So EVs, we think, will come in very rapidly, and we believe that the age of oil demand will peak by 2000 in 27, 28, and then oil demand will drop by 50% over the next 2 following decades thereafter. So oil, although perhaps will rise in the near term because of it's a depleting asset, and oil supply has been going down. Over the long term, we believe oil prices will settle down at the $25 to $26 level, which has implications for countries that produce oil. Their budget reserves will drop, but countries that import oil, which is many large emerging markets, will benefit significantly, and this will give a massive boost because of the terms of trade. There are certain countries with a current account deficit, and the deficit is entirely based on oil imports. So those countries are going to benefit significantly over the next 2 decades, past 2025, when oil peaks and the price goes into a secular decline. Next page, please. So not only is electric vehicles positive for the economy, but it's also for social indicators. With far fewer cars, we have far fewer accidents, and also the average traffic in the developed markets is due to the fact that we have too many cars. If every other family owns a car, let's say in the emerging markets, or every family in the developed markets owns a car, it just results in a mass amount of traffic and congestion and use of parking space to park these vehicles, which takes up a lot of urban real estate as well as congestion. So this actually will reduce that quite significantly, urban congestion, as we have EV autonomous vehicles, reduce the pollution of cities and urban areas. Next page, please. Next. Okay, well, thank you. This is the end of my presentation. So let me just give you a conclusion. The long-term trends affecting humanity is aging. We're now becoming an aging species. Urbanization is a trend that will continue despite the temporary resuburbanization because of COVID. Income inequality is growing. It's exacerbating, and this must be addressed in order to ensure social stability. Climate change is at a multi-century high, and we do need to address this. And we believe that the modern technologies will alleviate the worst case scenario. Automation is quite fascinating. It will be a productivity effect for the world, but by 2050, it's estimated that over 60% of occupations will become automated, and by 2100, over 80% of human occupations will be automated as well. So this has a negative effect on employment combined with artificial intelligence. The positive is that we still have countries that are producing very strong, productive young people within sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. Education now is shifting towards the emerging markets with the rise of China and India as becoming the centers for education around the world, with over half of tertiary degrees to be produced by those 2 countries alone by 2030. And remote education now and technology will allow spreading that education throughout the emerging markets to ensure our young people are productive and are employable in the future. IoT will increase the amount of efficiency of use of economic resources, as will artificial intelligence and the shared economy. And EV and renewables will help alleviate kind of the trend towards global warming. And we believe these are all very positive trends. I'll stop my conversation here and open it up to questions. So Miriam, Dr. Durbach, if you'd like to take it over.
Thank you, Rehan. That was incredibly informative. There are questions coming in, but my question was, you basically addressed the issue of the aging population being higher now. I would assume that means we're talking about industrialized countries, but what about third world countries? Is that also the case in third world countries, that the aging population is increasing and the younger generation is not?
Yes, in many large economies, as people have urbanized and gotten more education, less children are part of each family unit. But within certain areas like sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, the population continues to grow and is still very young. So one has to go country by country.
So in terms of the what you were talking about, in terms of the smart cities, I mean, again, you're alluding to industrialized countries. I mean, these smart cities are being developed here in the industrial world. But what about third world countries? I mean, I think some of the concerns we have over population growth and this, the use of smart technologies, as you alluded to, is really, again, alluding to industrialized countries. Can you explain, let's say, can you give us some demographics in Africa or, basically in Africa where population growth is not being controlled?
If I may disagree with you, Miriam?
Well, or you're saying that in Africa, because I know Dr. Durbach believes very much in population control, but I don't know. I mean, you're saying you disagree with the fact that in Africa the population growth is not growing; it's under control.
No. Just with regards to smart cities, if we do look at the emerging markets, many times they've leapfrogged with new technologies, and the demand for us as a capital guidance group is actually within the emerging markets, and to develop smart cities there, and they're willing to actually experiment with new technologies and implement them far more rapidly than the developed world. So I believe the emerging market cities will develop smart cities faster than the developed world. Similar to the way banking, mobile banking, started within actually sub-Saharan Africa and began to expand throughout the world. So I believe actually the emerging markets, because they don't have the legacy and the large infrastructure already in place, when they implement their infrastructure, it actually will be more advanced and it will leapfrog the Western world in terms of development of smart city applications. And we're seeing that the demand from many major countries within Asia already, that all new development has to be based on these smart city-based technologies that we have available. Because the demand for us, as a group, is coming from the emerging markets, not from the developed markets.
Right. And can you tell us more about the climate change as well? Like you alluded to climate change as well. Could you tell us more about how the climate change is being affected by the new technologies?
That question is a bit beyond my pay grade, and I apologize. There are many people here who are participating who are far greater experts than I am. But if we do look at it, the end of coal and all the announcements made by major economies around the world to end all fossil fuel consumption by 2050 is incredibly positive. And our demand, what we're seeing is that, for example, the investments we're making are all purely in clean energy. We will not get involved in any old fossil fuel burning based technologies at all. And that's very well received within the emerging markets. So again, here, I believe the emerging markets, because their energy demand is so rapid, their shift towards purely clean energy will be faster than the developed markets.
Right. I mean, I actually remember attending one of these smart cities you kindly invited me to a while ago, which was the Wharf in Washington. And I remember that staying in a very sort of, I would say, a technology-driven hotel that we were staying in, and it was, hadn't quite, the smart technology hadn't quite been accomplished, that I had terrible difficulty managing even the simplest sort of task of sort of drawing the curtain and turning on little, sort of devices around me. So isn't that a whole new education for people who are going to adjust to this? I mean, how is that going to take? I mean, you mentioned the technology revolution, the Internet of Things, and all of those things. I think just needs to be driven towards a whole new system of education for people like myself, at least my generation.
Well, Miriam, I am older than you, so I have more difficulty dealing with technology as well. However, I think young people learn this very rapidly, and I rely more on my son to teach me now how to use my phone and to use these smart technologies than I do. So it could be a generational effect in terms of at least ourselves, but I think young people will adopt it within a matter of hours.
Which means that
faster. That's my.
Which means the smart cities are directed for the next generation, not for us.
For all generations, we just may take a little longer to adhere to the new approach versus younger people.
Right. There's a question about addressing income inequality through taxes. Would you have any comments on that?
I hate to make a politically incorrect statement, but the extent and extreme of the rich versus the rest of the population is so extreme. Income distribution takes place through two methods. One is taxation, the other is revolution. So if we don't do it through taxation, then the people will take what rightfully belongs to them. The elite few cannot benefit for a system that's rigged for themselves. And policy has to change, and taxation policy has to change. Otherwise, we will just have far more social disruption. And we've seen multiple examples of that throughout the world, not to even mention on January 6th, the storming of the Capitol in the United States. So unless we address taxation as an appropriate tool, we're stuck with massive amounts of social disruption, which is something no one wants, and no one wants the loss of human life. Every life is precious.
Right, and can you tell us a little bit more about what since the World Information Transfer is a United Nations affiliated organization, can you tell us a little bit more about how you feel the United Nations can actually address these issues? Because I think that especially since COVID, we've had a very strong lack of communication between global leaders, institutions, and non-governmental organizations like WIT. So just give us some hindsight in your experience, because you've spoken at the UN quite a bit. I've been to some of your discussions there. How that can be addressed by a global entity like the United Nations?
Well, you can use COVID to your advantage. At least from my perspective, when I try to reach senior executives and CEOs, they're no longer traveling, they're no longer entertaining. So I found my access to CEOs and executives is far, far, far more easier. Actually, one of them right here, Shiv Kumka of the Sun Group, vice chairman, an incredible philanthropist and CEO. We have far more communication now than we did before, even though we're long-term friends. And I would say across the board, my access to the world's most powerful people is actually easier in COVID. So I think implementing now major projects during COVID is actually easier than before, at least for myself. That's my experience.
Well, because
I don't know how the United States.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of the questions was that if you were president now, if you were Joe Biden, what would you do about these challenges based on your research?
I would hand in my resignation immediately and retire. Being the president of the United States would probably be a too stressful job for me to handle. I have a low tolerance for stress.
Well, we have a few questions. We've already raised them, and Rehan has been answering them. So do you have any questions, Christine?
That in the past the 40 years, we have added 1 billion people per decade. And in 1962, we had 2 billion people, and this is 2021, and we have close to 8. So we have been growing very, very rapidly, and we have not been growing very rapidly in the developed countries. We have been basically growing in the developing countries. And this is a lot of the problem, because these people, and we're destroying a lot of our environmental, we're destroying the forests, we're dirtying up the oceans, we're doing a lot of things that happen when we have a tremendous amount of people that basically take away from the environment and do not sustain it. That is my concern. Besides the various diseases and everything else. So, and my question is, how do you perceive the situation as regarding the question of the health and environment of the global population if we continue this rapid population growth?
I'll take a very different stance to that question. The reality is we have, yes, a lot of people within the emerging markets, a lot of young people, they live in poverty. And if I have the choice, if I was we're highly educated people. We're highly entitled. We don't have to worry about our food. We have no idea about the lives of people at the bottom of the ladder. Now, if you have the choice between chopping down a tree and feeding your child so you can cook their food, or letting your child starve, you will You will chop down that tree, or you will cut corners. So it's not a matter. It's a matter of survival for many people around the world. And if anything, I'm empathetic for them. The problem is actually, in fact, government and global policy not to provide them appropriate access to energy, access to education, access to jobs. So if people have to survive, they do what they do. So how can we blame the bottom of the world's population? We have to blame ourselves for not providing them properly. We are the elite of the world. The elite have gotten more elite. They've gotten more rich, and we're starving our lower and lower middle class populations. How can you blame them for trying to just stay alive and survive? They would not do that if they had an alternative. So they are not to blame, but the blame is on policy and on governments not sustaining that. I mean, if you look at certain countries that have developed rapidly, and we take the example of China. China was by 1984 had the same per capita GDP as India, and now it has 4 times that. Now India is catching up, but there have been policies there for sustainability, but those policies came in a decade after you had to have the rapid growth behind it. So unless you have an enlightened government that ensures that its population has the basics of Maslow's hierarchy, which is shelter, food, education, and security of life, then we cannot blame the poor for what they're doing. We have to blame ourselves. That would be my very strong view that I share.
I am not blaming the poor. I am very glad of what you just said. We need to change our governance and our approach. Keep in mind that China has started growing tremendously after they have implemented the one child per family policy. Now, there were a lot of people that were complaining that China implemented it and the human rights. But the point is that the human rights belong to everybody, and not only to the people that produce and have 5, 6, 7 children when they can only afford to have 1 or 2. And this is where the governments need to step in, but the governments are not stepping in. So how do you have any ideas how they can step in to actually implement some programs that will assist with helping the poor develop in a way that will be sustainable for everybody?
We need more children, otherwise the global economy will go into a massive slowdown. It is economics that young people are more productive than older people. I mean, there are exceptions to that. There are older people who are highly efficient and productive, but on average, young people are far more productive for an economy. That's just fact. So we need more young people. We just need to ensure that when there are 5, 6 children in a family, that every child, there's no child left behind for education, they're provided for. And this is a matter of policy. And this is where the UN can play a vital role, because there are best practices around the world where countries have educated their poorest and their daughters. As I mentioned, female education is vital towards economic GDP growth rate and total factor productivity. So I would take the exact opposite stance, is that we need to produce more young children. We just need to ensure that all those children have basic food, security, education, and the ability to move forward. And if anything, I don't know if we can put my friend Shiv Kamke to speak about that, but he's a leader in terms of innovative ways to educate the young. And his charity, ESG, is in 150 different countries that actually increases the entrepreneurial nature of young people. And so he gives out $1 billion worth of grants every year for that. So we need people like Shiv, and we need people like the United Nations to do this. It's not a matter, we cannot not look at the population and say, okay, large population, bad for the economy. No, I mean, even China now has loosened its one-child policy because China understands that they need population growth. The formula for economic growth is changing population, changing capital, plus total factor productivity. So I strongly disagree that limiting children is the solution. I think actually that's the problem for humanity between now and 2100. We're aging too rapidly, and we need young children. We just need to support them. Is that when there are young people there, it is government policy, the policy of the United Nations, and the policy to work together to ensure they have the basics of Maslow's hierarchy. which is education, food, security, and I would put love in there because young children need love to be healthy adults. If we don't have that, then they will do everything you're saying. But I think it's the government's problem and lack of government policy to support the young.
However, if people cannot feed and clothe and educate one child, how do you expect them to be able to do it for 4 or 5 or 6 children? That it just doesn't compute.
Madam Durbach, the math works. Let's take India and Pakistan spending a massive amount on government army and expenditure on defense. Pakistan is very high to keep up with India. If we have a peace deal between India and Pakistan, we cut the defense budgets. The defense budget alone, if we cut it by half in Pakistan, we can ensure every child is educated, every child is clothed, every child has food and can become productive. So peace around the world is vital. We're spending our money as a government organizations around the world an incredible amount on defense. The US spends half the defense budget of the rest of the world combined to what end? Why can't that go into to help build infrastructure in the United States? Why can't that go to help educate our urban populations that are significantly disadvantaged and where there are obvious biases against? Or even young people in West Virginia or Alabama to get them the proper skill sets and to have the basic food. I mean, in COVID, one of the tragedies of COVID is that children can't go to school and they're starving because they used to get food at school. There are children now living here in the United States, one of the world's richest countries, on 1 or 2 meals a day. There are solutions, but this has to be done at the policy level to ensure that our children are taken care of. Our children are our most precious asset. They are the future. We are epilogue. They are prologue.
I think that you're forgetting about that many of the young children whose parents cannot provide for them are taken in and trained to be revolutionaries. We have seen that not so long ago. So I think that there has to be a clear delineation of what is necessary for the child's growth, what is necessary for the human population, and what is necessary for the environment. And this, I agree, has not been yet resolved. But encouraging people to have 5, 6 children is not the way to be able to resolve any problem. Because when you cannot, if parents who supposedly love the kids cannot take care of their children, you cannot expect somebody else to take them over unless they're going to be used and abused through arms, through sexual slavery, through utilization. So, all of it has to be put into perspective to achieve the sustainable development goals, not just promoting one single approach. The reason that the Chinese approach has worked so well is because they did focus on the elimination of too many children, which encouraged the people that have children to teach them, to educate them, and to promote them to be a constructive human being that is helpful to the entire world population, not just to those that want to use and abuse.
Dr. Durbach, maybe we should disagree to disagree, but my view is that it is the obligation of governments and of the United Nations and multilateral organizations to ensure that every young child has the basics of Maslow's hierarchy, as I've repeated several times. And why is the revolution? Why do people fight? They don't fight for any reason. No one wakes up one day and says, hey, I want to have a revolution or fight. They fight because they have no choice, because the economy is so bad and policies have actually failed them. So let's just agree to disagree. I believe that it is government policy and the policy of the United Nations and best practices and technology can be used to ensure that every child in the world has food, has shelter, and has security of life.
That we completely agree that every child needs to have food, shelter, and education. And if there is some programs And of course, there's a lot of programs, but if there's the government willingness and programs that implement the education and the growth, the healthy growth of a child, then we are basically on the same page.
Yes.
Fred, do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have some here. I will just
Yes.
one question. Rehan, with many reports that most people are moving out of urban areas due to the pandemic, do you think this will have effect on how development and urbanization will be affected globally?
Well, technology has helped us significantly. Even within my own organization, we're spread out throughout the world on every continent, and we've used technology highly efficiently. And it also encourages the use of satellite micro smart cities, where people can work within an area. Now, we should also come into some recognition that COVID will pass us. So science will prevail. Perhaps the first generation of mRNA vaccines have significant side effects, but we do have recombinant protein vaccines, the traditional vaccines, that should come out with there's a number of companies, including one developed by Dr. Casper Basinger in Switzerland and by Glaxo in AstraZeneca, that are traditionally based with far less side effects. So this is a condition, yes, that's temporary, and science has those solutions that will be implemented within the next 2 decades to address it.
So you believe that the trend will be reversed once the vaccine is out, and they will be, we'll be back to the cities? That's because of the?
Well, you can have satellite cities, and I don't think putting so many people into like a small square kilometer area is rational for human mental health. But I think having all these little micro cities around there where people can work, not have to commute, be closer to children, have better quality of life, have schools, and the smart technologies actually reduce the energy consumption. I think this is the way. Spoken hub, I think spoken hub developments around urban areas will be the trend for the next 2 decades.
Excellent
Mariam,
point.
do we have any other questions?
Well, there's a very quick one. We don't have much time left, but there's one that's asking, what do you think the future is for the emerging markets, given the disruptions that have happened in most countries due to some people having access to education during this current COVID pandemic?
I think it's a global phenomenon where poor young people are sitting at home trying to get their education remotely. Now, it's easy for me to do business deals because people who I'm dealing with have known me for 2 or 3 decades, and there's that element of speed and trust now. We have time now because we're not in board meetings or socializing or traveling, so we have more access to be productive from a business perspective. But I do believe the social isolation of children, because socialization is such an important part of their EQ development, and EQ affects IQ. I think that's a significant issue. But education is beyond my pay grade. I'm an educator, and I would defer to someone else on this call, maybe Dr. Durock or yourself, to address that versus myself.
Oh, that is what you're pointing out is very, very correct. There is a big problem with children not being able to get the benefit of any education. They sit and watch television, and this doesn't help. It also adds to the problem of obesity. As you know, that's another big. We have hunger on the one side and obesity on the other side. So you're absolutely true. That is a very important point. Well, I just would like to thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation. And we certainly have gained a lot of different perspectives. And with that, I would just say thank you. And Marian, thank you very much for taking over. Well, thank you, and have a very,
thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehan.
So do we. Thank you. Bye-bye.